Good morning. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join our webinar on enhancing your identity protection with seamless deception technology integration. Let's give folks 2 more minutes and we'll start. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on enhancing your identity protection with seamless detection technology integration powered by Acalvio. We'll have QA at the end, so please submit your questions throughout the webinar and we'll answer it then. I want to start off with introductions. My name is Kenny Rogers. I'm excited to walk through this innovative topic with you today. I'm currently the senior manager leading the CrowdStrike solutions team at Consortium Networks, which is the elite partner of CrowdStrike. We are cyber concierge for our customers, advocating for them and act as an extension of their team. I have over 25 years experience across multiple industries and verticals, including retail, oil and gas, hospitality, big data, and most recently leading an endpoint team at a top MSSP MDR company. My previous roles have been primarily blue or purple teams. As I mentioned in my last role, I managed a team which had 18 engineers around the globe, which were focused on improving the security posture of our customers, focused on endpoint security, deception technology, and network traffic analysis. We often spent hours and days setting up static honey tokens, which gives me a unique perspective into the identity challenge that our companies face today. Our team at Consortium doesn't have to spend countless hours manually managing honey tokens thanks to Acalvio's AI-powered deception technology. Enough about me. I'd like to pass it over to Cyril, who is the VP of Detection Engineering at Acalvio Technologies, to give him a chance to introduce himself. Cyril?
Thanks, Kenny. So, hi, I'm Cyril. I have a lot of domain experience in cybersecurity, and we would like to talk about our solution today, where we have actually automated honey token deployment and refresh at scale. And we are providing a seamless integration with CrowdStrike, where customers can get the benefit of getting defense against current as well as advanced identity threats. Look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you, Cyril. Today, as Cyril mentioned, we'll discuss the industry-leading AI-powered deception solution by Acalvio. It simplifies the creation and deployment of enterprise-scale honey tokens for identity protection. In minutes, it can be integrated with CrowdStrike's identity protection platform, which is the industry leader in defending against identity-based attacks. We'll expand on that knowledge to dive into how honey tokens, which are simply deceptive credentials or assets that can enhance your CrowdStrike identity security efforts, providing an early warning system for malicious activity. Our agenda for this webinar is as follows. We're going to cover the current identity threat landscape and the problems we're all facing. We're then going to discuss how enterprises need identity threat detection and response. Next, we'll cover the solution for the identity protection that provides comprehensive coverage for a wide variety of identity threats based on honey accounts and honey tokens. We will then review the Better Together story of Acalvio and Consortium Networks, helping our customers fight against identity attacks. After that, we'll view a short demo and review a recent customer case study from a large healthcare provider. Again, at the end, we'll make sure to leave time for Q&A, so please use the chat to ask questions as we go. Now let's get started. The identity threat landscape, specifically advanced persistent threats, commonly referred to as APTs, and ransomware target identities, Multiple threats target identities included hybrid, remote, and even cloud. Misuse credentials are now the top technique in breaches per CrowdStrike's annual threat hunting report, which highlighted that over 80% of all breaches involve the use of a compromised credential. These nation-state attackers target companies with Active Directory, launching identity-based attacks to gain access to their systems. Although MFA has been widely adopted by most companies, it's not possible for all accounts to have MFA, including service accounts or some even legacy devices. Identity compromise has even occurred across air-gapped or segmented environments, such as from IT to OT or IT to cloud. The recent RED report highlights the top 10 MITRE attack techniques, including readily available attack tools such as Mimikatz, Lasagna, Seatbelt, which all look for credentials. Not only are these common attacks, but they all can be conducted using off-the-shelf pen testing tools by anyone. On that note, I wanted to present some statistics around Active Directory, which were shocking to me. 95 million Active Directory accounts are attacked every day. 1.2 million Azure AD accounts are compromised each month. Hackers have been seen accessing AD in less than 16 hours. 1 out of every 2 organizations have experienced an attack on Active Directory in the last 1 to 2 years. And out of that, more than 40% of Active Directory attacks are successful. So at Consortium, we provide an identity risk or identity security risk review to help with that. Those numbers are staggering, and they highlight the identity challenges faced by most companies and enterprises today. So we provide our customers a free identity security risk review to address these issues in partnership with Acalvio, CrowdStrike, and other vendors. Within a few hours, we provide our customers with actionable recommendations to improve their overall AD security posture by reducing the identity attack vector. These reviews often conclude with the successful proof of value of CrowdStrike's identity protection, bundled with Acalvio's AI-powered deception technology. We'll have more to come on that in just a few minutes. I know that's a lot to consider. Let's go ahead and start with our first poll question, which is, how worried are you about identity threats? We'll give everybody a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll close out the question and go on to the next presentation. All right, we'll give it about 15 more seconds, and then Brittany, if you'll close it. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll. And then with that, we had 71% of the responses that are very worried, 29% somewhat worried. No one is less worried about identity threats, which goes into the norm these days. And so with that in mind, here at Consortium, we use several tools, including Metrics That Matter, to assist our customers in their cybersecurity journey. MTM utilizes NIST, which, for those that aren't aware, is National Institute of Standards and Technology. This is a voluntary cybersecurity framework which helps businesses of all sizes understand, manage, and reduce their cybersecurity risk. Deception and identity fall under the detect and protect functions of this framework. Deception systems such as Acalvio include honey accounts, which, as I mentioned earlier, are fake accounts where honey tokens are decoy credentials that aim to waste an attacker's time and alert the defensive team to the attacker's presence. They serve as bait for attackers, including unauthorized activity. NIST has recommended deception as a way to protect unclassified information in non-federal systems and organizations. So deceptions can be used to confuse adversaries about the information they use for decision-making, mislead adversaries about the value and authenticity of the information, and then mislead adversaries about the environment in which they are operating, which goes into the sections wasting adversaries' time and resources and lowers the efficacy and ability to gather data. And so, on that note, Kevin Mandia was recently quoted saying, let's see, if you have honey tokens, let me get this slide right. There we go. So, Kevin Mandia was quoted saying, so you have honey tokens and you know any use of them is bad. This creates an advantage for the defender, aka the SOC. Also saying that attacker won't know the environment when they get in, and threat actors will undoubtedly attack your identity architecture when they break in. If you have a few dummy accounts and build rules around them that any of this use is bad, then they create an advantage for the defender. Eli at CrowdStrike said that honey tokens play a critical role in luring adversaries from high value resources. I know myself, when I worked at the SOC, we immediately knew when a token triggered that someone was somewhere they weren't supposed to be. Whether this was an external or internal threat, I equated this to the silent alarm at a bank. The robber doesn't see the silent alarm activated, but they see the responders, aka cops, mitigating the risk, normally with guns blazing. With that, I'll pass it over to Cyril.
Thanks, Kenny. So if you look at identity security from a traditional security landscape, enterprises have invested in monitoring solutions which look at Active Directory logging on the domain controller, which try to do an analysis of the network traffic. And while that is a good solution and is necessary, modern attackers have evolved and they have found multiple ways to bypass those forms of detection. And so, for example, an interesting statistic from the CrowdStrike threat hunting report indicates a 583% increase in the use of a particular identity exploit technique known as Kerberoasting. So Kerberoasting is a way for the attacker to get access to credentials. And the reason this is so popular from threat actors is that everything malicious about the attack occurs offline. And so now if you look at traditional security and you try to monitor from activity on the domain controller or on the network traffic, then you cannot detect an attack of that nature. There are other attack techniques like that as well. For example, the breach that occurred at MGM Resorts last year, where the attackers went after a third-party sync agent and got access to credentials and were able to compromise the environment. So there are gaps in traditional forms of detection. Deception tech and honey tokens is effectively an excellent way of detecting identity attacks. And the premise of deception is completely different from traditional security, where you're not monitoring for activity against real entities. Instead, you are setting targeted traps for the attacker and observing for activity against these traps. And so that gives the benefit of being able to detect stealthy attacks that traditional security solutions cannot detect. Go ahead, Kenny. From a deception landscape perspective, there are two components that are provided as part of an identity threat defense solution. There is the honey token accounts. These are accounts added to Active Directory as part of deception tech. These can represent a user account. They could also represent a service account. Attackers typically target service accounts in an identity environment. And so setting traps of that nature is an important aspect for coverage. Corresponding to the honey token accounts added to the Active Directory, there are credentials that are deployed on endpoints. These endpoints could be workstations, they could be servers, and these honey tokens are deceptive credentials that are deployed into multiple caches on these endpoints, credential caches in the operating system, in application profiles. An example of a honey token would be a Windows endpoint having a LSAS memory. You can put deceptive credentials in the cache. And now if the attacker brings in Mimikatz to the discussion that Kenny brought up earlier, you will be able to detect immediately at that point itself. Go ahead. So while Honey tokens has been known to be an effective solution for identity threat, enterprises who have tried to use this manually have several challenges. Just one account in Active Directory has about 100 plus attributes in it. So now the administrator needs to make 100 decisions to create one Honey token account. Imagine if you try to do that at scale, where there are multiple accounts in one Active Directory domain. And typically, most organizations have more than one Active Directory domain. So doing that manually becomes very challenging. You need domain knowledge on deception tech, and you also need identity threat domain knowledge to be able to make this thing possible in a manual manner. And that is why enterprises and administrators are now looking for a solution that can automate this capability, use AI, and do this at scale. We can
All right. Thank you for that, Cyril. We're going to go ahead and do our second poll question, which is, have you tried creating Honey tokens manually? We'll give everybody a few seconds to answer it, and then we'll end the poll. All right, just a couple more seconds, and then we'll end it. Let's go ahead and end the poll and see what the results are. So the majority of the responses are that we haven't created Honey tokens manually. 2 out of 7 or 29% have. And so that kind of goes in with what we're talking about today. Appreciate everybody responding on that. Cyril, you're up next.
Thanks, Ken. So we'll discuss the joint solution from CrowdStrike and Acalvio to automate Honey tokens as part of identity threat detection offering. So in this solution, CrowdStrike has a set of capabilities. CrowdStrike Identity Protection has added the infrastructure to monitor an account, a Honey token account, and watch for usage of that. So any usage of a Honey token account results in a detection, and that detection shows up in the existing CrowdStrike console of the customer. CrowdStrike also has a way to respond to the detection, and so that way the SOC can actually, in an automated manner, isolate the endpoint on which the attacker is present. What Acalvio is providing as part of this joint solution is the deception platform and the AI. So Acalvio leverages AI algorithms to generate recommendations for the Honey token accounts at scale. And so the 100 attributes that were required for the manual creation of the Honey token accounts are fully automated as part of this joint solution. Acalvio's algorithms generate relevant recommendations for each of these attributes. It can create multiple Honey token accounts in one AD domain, and it supports large number of domains as well as a large number of endpoints. So everything is completely automated. It is blended with the target environment. Typically, organizations have a naming scheme for a service account or for a user account. Acalvio's AI algorithms gain an automated understanding of the naming schemes in use in that environment, and then we blend the deceptions to make them look realistic on a per domain basis. We also make these deceptions attractive to the attacker, and so that way the idea is to influence the attacker to going towards the deceptions instead of targeting the real accounts. And then we can actually personalize these to avoid attacker fingerprinting, and we do an autonomous and a scalable deployment. So that way we can actually deploy this at scale across multiple endpoints and large number of domains. Go ahead, Kenny. So here is an example of the Acalvio Honey token account recommendation. So what you're seeing here is the power of the Acalvio AI in action. So if you look at the actual set of Honey token accounts that are recommended by the platform, We generate honey token accounts of multiple types. These can represent service accounts for important assets like a production database, such as a SQL Server. They could be accounts that represent identity architecture elements, such as Active Directory Federation Services or ADFS. They could also represent privileged admin accounts. So, for example, a help desk admin account or a support admin account are all generated by the Acalvio algorithms. And these are done in a completely automated manner. And that way, the administrator and the customer does not need to take any other additional steps. They just view this recommendation, they can approve the ones that are relevant to them, and then just deploy. That's all the step that the admin has to do. These honey tokens are then also marked in CrowdStrike in an automated manner. And so if you see the CrowdStrike Identity Console, the honey tokens are then marked and surfaced to the CrowdStrike admin. And so the CrowdStrike administrator can go to a single console, which is a CrowdStrike console, and get visibility into the honey tokens. They do not need to get into the Calvio console to see the honey tokens once the initial setup is done. And any usage of the honey tokens results in an alert, and that alert is also showing up in the CrowdStrike identity detection screen. And so you get an alert of this nature where the SOC would get to see that a honey token account has been used. The endpoint under threat, the timestamp are all captured in addition to the honey token account that was used by the adversary. So that way the SOC gets a single pane of glass. They do not need to change their workflows. They do not need to learn any new console. Effectively, no changes for the SOC whatsoever. Go ahead. Now, from the benefits of this solution for CrowdStrike Identity Protection customers, CrowdStrike Identity Risk Review typically surfaces hundreds or thousands of findings. So in any enterprise environment, Active Directory always has certain misconfigurations that creep in over time. Mitigating all of these findings is not really practical because there are always business considerations that need to be considered. For example, if you have a production database and there's a SQL service account pointing to that database, as an administrator, you cannot go and change the settings on the service account because it can impact the functioning of the production database. And so as a result, administrators can mitigate the low-hanging fruits, but it's always difficult to mitigate everything. And so then, if prevention is not complete, enterprises need an ability to detect. And so there's a detection layer that is necessary for an overall solution from an identity security perspective. Honey tokens are an effective and proven approach to detect identity threats. And what Acalvio's integration with CrowdStrike is doing is to automate the deployment, the refresh, and make these attractive to the attackers. And the other benefit of this integration is no changes for the SOC. All the detections are surfaced in the existing CrowdStrike console, and so it becomes very easy to adopt. In addition, from a deployment perspective, the solution does not require any other software to be installed on-prem at all. So effectively, there's no agents to be deployed. There are no virtual machines, effectively no footprint in the customer enterprise environment whatsoever. It's completely a cloud solution. And so as a result, the only thing the enterprise has to do is to activate it. There's no other steps required. Go ahead, Kenny. Let's talk through a quick demo of this solution in action. So effectively, in this workflow, we have set up an enterprise network. And in that enterprise network, we have enabled the integration of Acalvio with Falcon Identity Protection. And the honey token accounts and the honey tokens recommended by Acalvio have been deployed. And these are then automated and integrated with Falcon. We'll just let it play out. Kenny has a video Paused. Okay. So CrowdStrike Identity Protection performs a monitoring and the blocking of Honey accounts. So here you are seeing the Acalvio recommended Honey accounts that have been registered. Now let's look at an identity attack scenario. So we'll talk through an attack scenario on how the solution works in action. So on an endpoint, the attacker gets to that endpoint. This is effectively the initial beachhead of the attacker. So attacker lands on the endpoint and they're looking for credentials in the cache. So the attacker does some reconnaissance. They find some credentials for a service account, and then they try to use it for lateral movement. This attempt is then denied for the attacker. The defense gets an alert, and the alert shows up in the CrowdStrike Identity Console. And this alert indicates the Honey token. And that is because the attacker was not able to determine, but that credential that they used was actually an Acalvio Honey token that was deployed in the environment as part of the integration. Go ahead, Kenny.
Thank you, Cyril. Love to see that in action. Earlier in the webinar, we briefly discussed the Identity Security Risk Review, which is powered by CrowdStrike, and it provides valuable insights into an organization's identity security posture. We don't have time to go through everything today, but it does give you visibility into identity risk, detection of credential misuse and compromised accounts, exposure to insider threats, recommendations for risk review or reduction, compliance support. It also improves incident response. You'll be able to proactively threat hunt in your environment. And lastly, the Acalvio's AI-powered deception technology is a quick win for our customers in these cases. Because all of the above insights and information is great, but what we see today is security teams are lacking resources and time. So nothing is done quickly when it comes to mitigating threats. So Acalvio Honey tokens, kind of like Cyril mentioned, gives the defenders a quick solution to protect the keys to their kingdom, aka Active Directory. We see customers start no risk 60-day POVs so that Honey accounts and tokens can be deployed in minutes. While the vendors, Acalvio in this case, manage those tokens, defenders are free to focus on resolving their threats discovered during the review. This is yet another tool in our cyber concierge arsenal that improves our customers' security posture. And so you can notice on the left side goes into the overall risk score, and then it breaks down the risk matrix on what's most likely to occur. And then on the right side, it goes into overall posture, number of users, even touches on the different types of risk related, like pass the hash, Kerberoasting, and even golden tickets, which are commonly seen. Next up, I'd like to review a recent case study for one of our customers who is a large healthcare provider. Let's dive into the role that Honey tokens played for them. The customer faced numerous threats, including identity, lateral movement, insider threats, and ransomware. They reached out to their cyber concierge or at consortium networks for help addressing these threats. The customer was interested in reducing their mean time to detect, sought a high fidelity of detections, and eliminating gaps in current detection layers. Within hours, we conducted an identity security risk review at no cost while mitigating some of the findings. For example, unmanaged devices, which Cyril touched on earlier, create a gap in the existing security tools. Ideally, we're able to deploy EDR sensors on those devices, but oftentimes it's not that easy. You could have outdated operating systems. And so Acalvio is a great way to control to implement, to detect, and respond to the involving threat. This buys the SOC invaluable time to protect from lateral movement and other common tactics. The criteria, which Cyril mentioned earlier, is very simple. There's no agent to deploy. Oftentimes, vendors have a magic bullet. It involves deploying an agent, which sounds super easy, but when you get into the nuts and bolts in large enterprises with thousands of devices, that's not a viable solution. So, Acalvio is able to be deployed in minutes. They have a SaaS platform in the cloud. We went through the integration with CrowdStrike, which is simply using API keys. So you can do that in minutes as well. It's scalable, which to protect multiple identity stores and endpoints. The customer in this case was thrilled that they didn't have to change their existing incident response plan, along with the items I listed above. And so in this case, the customer is able to quickly configure and deploy Acalvio honey tokens in minutes to minimize the risks that we've been discussing about the current identity threats. Unlike other deception products, these honey tokens are dynamic and ever-changing, reducing the need to manually manage these decoys. Consortium Networks even ran this setup in our lab to document it for our customers to further simplify the process during a deployment. And so you're able to quickly set up and manage those honey accounts and then deploy them throughout the environment. Furthermore, we were quickly able to run a simulated test to see firsthand the value of the product. Even more important, the SOC or defenders were able to respond to the threats within minutes and not hours or days, reducing the mean time to respond. In this case, the customer learned a lot from this deployment. They could, no, sorry, the red team was no longer able to aimlessly wander around the environment without being detected. Honey tokens generated that silent alarm that we discussed earlier and isolated the threat, enabling the SOC to gain visibility. It even gave them the ability to automatically isolate the threat or even have a human oversee that activity. This resulted in the customer having a new tool in their arsenal to protect their environment. With that in mind, Acalvio and Consortium Networks will be at Falcon, which is next week in Vegas. And so we're hoping to see all of our customers at that event. We'll both have presentations in the Partner Pavilion on Tuesday. And so please come and see us. And then furthermore, we'll get into the Q&A after this. So if you haven't been asking questions, please do so now. Let's see. So we have a couple of questions for seed questions while people type up some additional ones. The first one, Cyril, or I can answer this one, is how should deception technology be represented at change control meetings? This has also or always been a challenge depending on the customer and their maturity in their CAB processes. You're supposed to bring everything through to the CAB, no matter what it is. But oftentimes with deception technology, it's just as valuable for insider risk. So it may not be a good idea to actually discuss those at the change controller CAB meetings. There may need to be offline meetings and discussions with the executives in IT and cyber to represent the changes that are being made. Because if everybody knows where the tokens are and which honey counts are deployed, that's going to lower the fidelity of it, especially from insider risk. So that's kind of a case-to-case basis, and we'd love to discuss that more with you as well. And then I have another question for Cyril. After a red team engagement, do the honey accounts need to be redeployed?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the Acalvio solution, you do not need to redeploy the honey accounts after red team engagement because Acalvio is a highly dynamic platform. And so we get visibility into the fact that there have been detections surfaced by a set of honey token accounts. We automatically update the landscape. So we add new honey token accounts, we delete a few of them. And so it's a ever-changing minefield for the attacker. And so that way you don't have to, as an admin, do any other manual steps.
Thank you, Cyril. With that, have another one. Does Acalvio's product work with CrowdStrike's identity detection and protection products, or just protection?
Yes, the solution works with both modules. So CrowdStrike identity detection module also works with the Acalvio integration, and the alerts would be surfaced. In the case of the protection module, there is one difference where the response to the attacker will be blocked in real time. In the detect module, the blocking actions will not be available, but the actual integration itself of putting the honey tokens and getting the visibility to the identity threats will work across both of these.
Perfect. That's very helpful. Definitely makes sense on the protection module, adding more capabilities. Another reason for customers to have that product. Detection is great, but the prevention and protection capabilities with CrowdStrike bundled with the Calvio definitely was a seller for me. Another question is, I'm worried about insider threats. Can Honey tokens help me with detecting insider threats? If so, how?
And that's a good question. So insider threats are of many different types. So there is, for example, the compromised user, and then it goes all the way till the rogue administrator, right? And so effectively, depending on who the nature of the insider is, the threat landscape differs. But ultimately, any insider is also always interested in one important thing, which is interesting data. And so the goal of the insider is to be able to get to sensitive data. And so the insider has trusted access to the environment, but they need to plot a course towards where the interesting data resides. In order to do that, the insider needs access to privileged identities. And because honey tokens can set traps for the insider corresponding to privileged identities, at a point of the attack lifecycle of the insider, they will run into the honey tokens. And so you can detect the insider risk before the actual insider threat is completed.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cyril. How much time would you say does it take customers to deploy Acalvio's AI-powered deception for honey tokens?
From a deployment steps perspective, I would say the solution can be rolled out within minutes because effectively in this integration, there is no software to be installed on-prem, no firewall changes, no agents to be deployed. And so the only steps are to go to the CrowdStrike console, enable a bunch of permissions to be able to enable the API connectivity between CrowdStrike and Acalvio, provide Acalvio with the corresponding API key, and that's it. Everything else the platform will automate and manage by itself.
And those permissions are those for the API key itself?
That's right.
Perfect. All right. And then another question is, are there any recommendations on where to place honey tokens? Can this integration help me with this?
Yeah, that's a good point. So typically our recommendation is to deploy honey tokens at scale. And so if let's say, for example, in the healthcare context that Kenny spoke about earlier, so the customer has multiple Active Directory domains, has large number of endpoints. Now the attacker can get access to any of these endpoints or could target any of these domains. Now the defender's goal is to detect the threat as early as possible. So by deploying honey tokens in each of these domains and on all the endpoints, you get the benefit as a defender of detecting the threats early. Acalvio's solution also provides administrative control. And so, for example, if the administrator has a certain type of an environment where they do not want to deploy honey tokens in the initial phase of the rollout, then they can control that, they can provide the policies, and we can then deploy this at scale across the rest of the enterprise network.
Perfect. Love that. Another question is, how does Acalvio know my crown jewels in order to deploy honey tokens near them?
Yeah. That information is then made available to Acalvio through the APIs of CrowdStrike. So through the API integration with CrowdStrike, we get visibility into the type of endpoints and the user accounts and the service accounts. And then Acalvio applies domain knowledge plus AI to be able to determine which of these are the crown jewels. For example, we look at naming schemes of a computer object, and we determine that this is the Active Directory Federation Service computer entity. And so now we can then deploy honey tokens representing that, completely automated.
Perfect. Love that. Yeah, because I know in my past jobs that was a big deal. It's like it would take customers a lot of time. Sometimes, they don't or we don't even know where our crown jewels are in those larger enterprises. So it's great to see a solution that can help remove one of those barriers and enable the teams to do more. One more question. With each breach, I learn about new ways the attackers are exploiting identities. Can honey tokens help me with defending against attack techniques that would emerge in the future? If so, how?
Yes. And so that's effectively the main benefit of deception tech and honey tokens, where effectively you're not looking at the attacker technique. So you're not actually worried as a defender whether the attacker is doing Kerberoasting today or pass the hash tomorrow, or silver ticket attacks day after. Instead, you're trying to say what is the goal of the attacker. The goal of the attacker typically always involves escalating privileges. And so the attacker wants to get from an unprivileged account to a higher privileged account. And so in order to do that, they only have a few possibilities. They can go after important service accounts, they can go after important admin accounts. And so as a defender, if the solution can set traps at the right places, then you will be able to detect even if the attacker's offensive techniques change. So that's basically the benefit of the solution.
Love that. Thank you, Cyril. Well, with that in mind, that's all of our questions. Appreciate everybody's time today. It's been a pleasure taking time to learn about Acalvio and Consortium's solution to address some of these identity threats that we discussed today. I'd encourage everybody to reach out to schedule a demo or an identity security risk review. See you all next time. Hope to see you at Falcon, and thank you for your time today.